What's the significance of an inverted pentagram?
Well, that's a 5-pointed star where 2 points are up and 1 point is down. And that's for the last several hundred years, it's kind of a universally recognized symbol of black magic and Satanism. It's on the cover of the Satanic Bible. It's used by almost all satanic groups, and it basically symbolizes the drawing down of the kingdom of Satan, the manifestation on the earth.
Does an inverted pentagram have any other significance?
Well, in terms of the polarities of male and female, the inverted pentagram emphasizes the male, and then the lower point symbolizes the dangling male organ. On the other hand, when you have an upright pentagram, that symbolizes the goddess, the female, because you've got the opening there.
How do you know that?
Well, it's something that's taught to virtually everybody who's in witchcraft or the occult.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's pretty common knowledge.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you please tell us the story about the time you spent with a very dangerous man, and where you said that the paintings moved on the walls?
Well, at one point, we heard about this fellow. I can't remember how. Oh, I know. It was in a book we'd read. And he was involved with the OTO, which is a very high-level Crowleyan black magic type organization. And he was down in Chicago. We were in Milwaukee, so he was real close. So we contacted him, and he invited us to come down for a seminar. And we attended the seminar, and we had never heard anything as advanced as what this guy was teaching. And so I thought I'd like to study with this guy. And he also offered to make me, at the time I was an old Roman Catholic priest, and he offered to consecrate me an old Catholic bishop. And so he said he wanted me to come down for a few weekends, like once or twice a month or so, to so I could study with him. And so we began that thing, and I'll never forget that first night. It was like a Saturday night or something, and his whole apartment, he had this big apartment over Lake Michigan, and like 35, 40 stories up, and he had all these weird-looking plants up against the window. None of them looked like anything I'd ever seen before. They all looked like they were from Mars or something, and he had all these strange paintings on the wall. It looked like sort of primitive aboriginal art done by someone with a dirty mind. Strange swirls and everything. I asked him, he says, well, they were his Trans-Yugathian icons. Like in the Orthodox Church, you have these icons that are believed to be windows to heaven. Well, he said these paintings were windows into other dimensions. So anyhow, he had me, after doing some rituals and drinking several glasses of wild turkey whiskey, which he said was necessary to raise the energy levels. We both went. He was really into whiskey and stuff. And he also is the fellow who taught me about voodoo and initiated me into voodoo. He had me sleep on a futon out in the living room, kind of about maybe 5 or 6 feet from these weird plants in this window, and he, of course, went and slept in his bedroom. And as I lay there, you're trying to get to sleep, and you keep hearing these strange rustling sounds in the room, and he had no pets. And I'd turn on the light, and the paintings would have moved, or the plants would have moved. They had all these weird images, like the Addams Family TV show. They had these plants that eat people and everything.
Did the pots move, or just the plants?
The plants would move around, And he told me earlier, and this really made me feel it. He says, well, part of the reason the plants look so good is that he always ejaculated into the plant water first, so he was watering them with his own semen.
Oh.
So anyhow, this guy was, and of course he had a rosary in his pocket. He was always saying the rosary. He was an ordained deacon in the Episcopal Church.
Wow.
In addition to being an old Catholic archbishop. So anyway, I just was terrified. It was one of the scariest nights of my life, because every time I'd turn on the light, the painting would be here, and then it would be here, and one painting would be here, and one painting would be there. And they almost glowed in the dark.
But they painted on the wall or hung on the wall?
No, they were like canvases hung on the wall. Huh. But they were these wild, primitive-looking things, and several of them had eyes, and the eyes just seemed to glow, And I don't think I slept more than about a half an hour. In fact, the next time I went down there, my wife Sharon had made me this one chasuble that was like this white vestment, like like you used to see, and still do see Catholic priests wear, but a huge red ankh on it, which is a good symbol supposedly in the occult. I said, I'm taking that thing next time. I'm sleeping under that thing. Because I was just scared to death. And every now and then I'd take a friend down with me. And this guy also happened to be a homosexual. And so he never wanted women, he only wanted men to come down. And he was always sort of, like looking at us in kind of a predatory way. And just a very, very strange individual. But yet a very brilliant individual, but probably the most evil person I've ever known.
Wow, so can you make any comment about people who are super highly intelligent? Because sometimes people think when someone's super highly intelligent that they have to be good.
Well, that doesn't necessarily follow, because everyone is born with a fallen nature, that we have a tendency in us towards sin. And just because you're brilliant doesn't mean you're moral. A lot of the people who were involved in the Nazi regime were very brilliant. Look at this Michael Aquino, he's very brilliant. He can get a PhD and, whatever, and be in the position he was in and not be a really intelligent guy. So that's a fallacy. There's some very, very holy, brilliant people, but there's also some very evil, brilliant people. And unfortunately, when evil blends, to quote Sherlock Holmes, when evil blends with intelligence, when the criminal mind comes in with great intelligence, and you have a truly appalling situation.
And could you make a similar comment about anyone who's like really well dressed, has a lot of money, acts like a really nice person?
Well, yeah, again, contrary to popular belief, most of the really dangerous Satanists wear, real expensive suits and beautiful haircuts, and they're like the movers and shakers in any given city. I just can speak to Chicago, but I know some of the most powerful names in the city of Chicago, at least when I was doing this stuff back in the 70s and early 80s, were Satanists. And, and yet they were like, they looked very well dressed, and they were thought of as being pillars of the community. So you can't, that's why, again, Yeshua said, don't judge by appearances, judge righteous judgment. And he also said, beware of wolves that are in sheep's clothing. Because obviously a wolf in sheep's clothing looks sweet and nice, they look like a sheep,
Right. What's the significance of Aleister Crowley?
Well, I mentioned him on and off, and he's probably one of the most, if not the most influential ceremonial magician of the 20th century. And he was born in 1875, and he died in 1947. And basically he was a genius, another example of sort of the evil genius, He went to Oxford, and he was raised by a very, oddly enough, Aleister Crowley is like the nightmare version of the preacher's kid, because he was raised by a very strict Plymouth Brethren family. In fact, his mother, I think, was too strict. And every time he'd misbehave, she'd beat him, and she started saying, when you grow up, you're going to be the great beast. Now, what kind of a mother would say that to a kid, So by the time he was 18, when he went to Oxford, he baptized the toad in the name of Jesus Christ and crucified it upside down. And he went on, and he was like a poet and a mountaineer and a chess master, and he also ended up joining the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was like the central occult society of the late 19th and early 20th century. And he went from there, he married this poor, unfortunate woman, Rose Kelly. And, he had like 3 or 4 wives, and all of them ended up either alcoholics or suicides. But he took her on her honeymoon, their honeymoon, to Egypt. And they went and spent their honeymoon night in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, where he reported he saw blue light circulating around the room. And later on, Crowley took her to the Cairo Museum just to see some of the exhibits. And for some strange reason, she was drawn to this one exhibit down at the end of the hall, and it was a stele. And a stele in Egyptian lore is like a big kind of thing that's got writing on it. It looks almost like the cliche image of the tablets that Moses wrote the Ten Commandments, Yahweh wrote the Ten Commandments on. And he comes down to it, and it happens to be exhibit number 666. And so he felt this is something, this is a real important, whatever you want to call it, magical coincidence. And so he looked at what this was, and it was the stele of Ankh-Khonsu, who was a priest in some ancient dynasty. And he came to understand at that moment that he was the reincarnation of Ankh-Khonsu. And so he went home that night, and I think over the next few nights, this is in 1904, his wife started going in a trance, and she started giving him this book, which ended up being what is called the Liber Alvel Legis, the Book of the Law. And he thought that he was the new avatar of the new aeon, just like Christ was the beginning of the Christian age, he was the beginning of the Crowleyan age, the new age. And he started a new religion, which he called Crowleyanity. This guy had no problem with self-esteem. And in fact, he used to say that the greatest experience any woman could ever have on the spiritual level would be to have sex with him. So he was a real character. And he basically founded he said the cardinal rule of his religion was, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. And because of the emphasis on the word will, he called, another name for his religion was the religion of thelema, which is the Greek word for will. So people who follow Crowley are called Thelemites. And essentially, he cast this huge shadow over 20th century magic. Basically, Wicca was based on a lot of his writings, and a lot of the magical work that has been done since the 1950s in America and England and even in Europe, because he ended up, for a long story, but he ended up being made the head of the OTO for the English-speaking world, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is an occult Templar Rosicrucian society that taught sex magic. And so, he had influence in that area as well. Plus, he was a very high-level Mason. So, he had so many Masonic degrees, he used to joke, he said an elephant would creak under the weight of all the medals and garlands and aprons that I have the right to wear in terms of my Masonic achievements.
And what did you think of him at the time?
Well, we thought he was a very powerful and enlightened being, and we felt that he was kind of, to our century, what Yeshua was to his century. And because a lot of his stuff was very wise, and a lot of it was very hateful. It's one of those paradoxes, and as I think I mentioned earlier, I actually supposedly went into trance and had him speak through me. So we trusted him enough to let that happen. And we like a lot of the rituals we did were out of his books. We did Gnostic masses, we did the Bornless ritual, we did some of his other rituals. In fact, every day we would do his sun salutations at morning, noon, evening, and midnight. It was like we weren't ever officially Thelemites, even though we did belong to the OTO. But we were unofficially very much into him.
And what advice would you give to people now who have a curiosity about his writings?
Well, even like when we were in this stuff, a lot of people would write and say, beware of what Crowley writes, because he deliberately does some things backwards just to mess with people's minds. He'll give you magical instructions, kind of like a recipe, how to do this ritual, and he'll deliberately, and we even knew this, and so we'd go to the spirit guides, and the spirit guides would tell us supposedly what was right. But he would deliberately put booby traps in his books. And if you did one wrong thing, it would blow up in your face magically and you ended up in a lunatic asylum. So, and a lot of people, see, that was our generation, that kind of came up in the 60s and 70s. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are messing, because he's no more popular now than he ever was during his life. And a lot of the people who are messing around with Crowley don't understand it. They end up getting demon-possessed to their eyeballs. He ended up basically, in his life, a total failure. He spent the last 2 or 3 years of his life living in this, rented room next to a cemetery in Brighton, living on heroin and boiled eggs. He was a hopeless heroin addict for the last, third of his life. So even though he believed, he would actually deliberately get himself addicted to heroin because he thought his will, you see again, thelema, will, was strong enough to break free of the drug, but obviously it wasn't. So I would tell people this is a lot of dangerous anti-Christian, not just because it's anti-Christian, but just dangerous philosophy. Every person this man touched died horribly. They either killed themselves, their lives were ruined, they became alcoholics, they became drug addicts. Hardly anybody survived a relationship with Crowley. Only 2 people that I know of, Israel Regardie and Freder Achad. and was because Israel Regardie was a psychiatrist, so he had enough mental wherewithal to withstand the games. Because Crowley would do stuff like he knew, for example, Israel Regardie was Jewish, and Crowley was very anti-Semitic, even though he was into Kabbalah, which sounds really bizarre. And so he'd call him, oh, that stupid Yid, or he'd make all these anti-Semitic remarks, and he just mess with people's heads, and be cruel to them. Whatever he knew was important to an individual, he would attack that and just make total, mush out of a person if he could. He was proud of the fact that he drove people to suicide.
Wow.
He felt if someone was weak enough that they would go out and kill themselves and they didn't deserve to live. Again, he was, he called himself the wickedest man in the world and was proud of the fact that that's what the London newspapers called him as well.
Wow. Thank you. For the readers, I was going to give a few quotes from the Satanic Bible to give them an idea how bad it is. So,
sure.
Give blow for blow, eye for eye, fourfold and 100-fold. Cursed are the lambs of God, for they shall be bled whiter than snow. Cursed are the feeble, for they shall be blotted out. Thrice cursed are the weak, whose insecurity makes them vile, for they shall serve and suffer. Have you got any advice to people who have a curiosity to read the Satanic Bible?
Well, I would say it is certainly one of the most evil books written in the 20th century, and I would advise them to not even read the thing. It's a powerful talisman in and of itself. To even have it in your home is dangerous. We have a copy where we keep it out in like a box in the shed, or something. It's just not a book you'd want to read because it's hateful. It is full of hate. It's full of hatred toward all the unfortunate people of society, hatred toward God, hatred toward people. And I would just say that it's as easy a way of any is to really burn your soul, is to read that book, because it will draw you in. Just like I had never had any. I picked it up because this friend of mine told me to, and I read it. I never had any intention of becoming a member of the Church of Satan, but yet a year later I was in it. A year after that I was a second-degree member of it. So it can draw you in. These occult books have incredible power to pull people in. And people don't realize that that's just a book.
So many people think that these days.
Yeah.
So your testimony is wonderful too.
Yeah, it is very, very ruinous, and I would advise everybody to stay away from it. I know it's forbidden or it's evil or it's wicked, so I want to read it. Especially young people tend to think that way. But it'll just destroy your life if you take it seriously. And if you don't take it seriously, why read it? Right.
Can you give me some evidence of that reading the Satanic Bible made people more violent?
Well, there's been several killers, serial killers, rogue killers, whatever, that have been found, like Richard Ramirez is the best known one, the Night Stalker, who had the Satanic Bible in their possession. Son of Sam comes to mind as well. A lot of lesser, known just creeps that were out there killing children or women or whatever that had possession of the Satanic Bible. So it's an extremely dangerous book.
You said that Satanists think that hell's an okay place, but if some of them finally work out that they actually really are going to get punished for the bad things they've done, why don't they try to leave Satanism then?
Well, on the lower level, a lot of them do. I mean, like a lot of Church of Satan members have gotten away from it and gotten saved. But of course, it takes the power of the Holy Spirit, the power of Yahweh Almighty. The higher level ones, even like such as I was, you're dealing with a person who's got a tremendous amount of demonic infestation. And if you start moving in the direction of getting away from Satanism, those demons can just really put a world of hurt on you. They can control the pain centers in your brain and make you just wish you were dead. I mean, you go towards like reading a Bible or kneeling at the altar or something and praying to be saved. They'll just like make you feel like you've got the grandmother of all headaches. Just like stimulus response. Just like you treat an animal. And so it's only again by the grace of Yahweh and the power of the Holy Spirit that anybody can get free from these things. Even Anton LaVey's own son, Anthony, he got born again, mostly through reading our books, and now he corresponds with us all the time. It's weird to get a Christmas card from Anthony LaVey, but we do.
Great.
So that's a real praise report. And many, I'm not the only one. I mean, many I get emails at least several times a year from former Satanists that are now joyfully serving the true and living Yahweh.
Great. So if someone has sold their soul to Satan, how can they undo that agreement?
Well, first of all, unless they're a Christian, their soul belonged to Satan from the moment they were born anyway. So the agreement is sort of a joke. But all they have to do is simply turn over their life to Yeshua, to Jesus Christ. And they need to get down on their knees. I'd recommend doing it with a preacher of some sort, who knows what he's doing, because to do this alone I did it alone, but it can be a little daunting because there might be some spiritual attack. And just pray and confess that you're a sinner. Pray and renounce the satanic oaths you took in your membership in the Church of Satan and say it's evil, I don't want anything more to do with it, I'm sorry that I did it. And then ask Yeshua to come into your life and be the Lord of your life, the Master of your life, and ask Him to save you from your sins and from the power of the adversary. And He will. And at that moment, that contract is broken.
Great.
Now, that isn't to say you might not need a little, prayers for liberation after that, but in terms of your eternal destiny, that contract was broken. Okay,
good. Is there any other advice you'd give to Satanists?
Well, they need to repent. They need to get out of it because they're on the losing side. The scriptures have never been wrong about one single prophecy that has been in those books of the Bible, and so why would they be wrong about the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, where it says that all liars and fornicators and sorcerers that mock Yahweh will end up being cast in the lake of fire, along with the devil, along with his fallen angels, and you don't want to have that happen to you. That's a horrible destiny that nobody can even imagine. But it's a fit destiny for those who turn their back on Yeshua and on the true and living Yahweh.
Thank you. What advice would you give to people who know someone who's a Satanist?
Well, at the risk of sounding mercenary from what I suggest they buy my book, Lucifer Dethroned, because that book is my autobiography, number 1. It's a survey of modern-day Satanism, number 2. And number 3, it has a whole large chapter in the back on how to witness, how to minister to someone who's in Satanism and get them born again. But quickly, my number 1 advice would be to start praying for that individual, start praying for them and binding the spirits that are giving them their occult power. That's the best thing you can do, because if they realize there's a more powerful force than the demons that seem to be giving them their power, it's going to really rattle their cage. And because they've been conditioned by their training in Satanism to want power, even though it's not the immediately best reason, they're going to kind of like turn from Satan and try to figure out, okay, what's making this happen? And they're going to find themselves led to the cross. Let me share one quick thing I heard from Henry Gruver, who's a real prayer warrior. He says what he does when he encounters Satanists or a satanic ritual site, someplace that appears to be being used by Satanists, he'll pray that everyone there, and any Satanists or whatever, witches, druids, whatever, will be confronted with the power and the glory of Yeshua, that they will somehow see it, and that they will either be so awestruck with it that they will bow the knee and worship Him as Almighty Yahweh, or else they will flee in abject terror and never come back. That's a good prayer. And
does that work?
It does.
Good.
He's dismantled entire networks of black witches over in England by doing that.
Great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. What different kinds of magic are there?
Well, basically, we touched on this very quickly earlier. There's everything from what is called folk magic, which is very primitive and usually relates to like people that are in sort of developing countries and things like that. And this is stuff like, for example, a farmer and his wife might go out after he's planted the seeds of his crop for the year, and the first night of the full moon, they might go out and make love in the field to give fertile energy to the field to help the crops grow better. That would be an example of folk magic, or various ideas like, you have to, plant potatoes Good Friday or something, or you have to do this. Farmer's Almanac stuff is part of it. Not that the Farmer's Almanac is witchcraft, but I mean it's an example of these kind of folksy things that people do. Then there's like what is called cultural spiritism. This is kind of the next notch up. These are more organized groups that are usually part of an ethnic group. The best known would be voodoo, Santeria, Umbanda, Palo Mayombe. These are all groups that are a mixture of Catholicism and ancient African religions that have sprung up in places like Brazil and Cuba and Haiti, Mexico, places like that. These are very powerful and very dangerous forms of magic, black magic. And then there is what is called witchcraft, which we've kind of already touched on. Then there's ceremonial magic, which is this very high ritualized form of magic. And all of these things, you understand, can either be white or black magic. Although typically, especially the cultural spiritist types, tend to be more black magic. And then there's what is called hermetic magic, which is when you arrive at a level that you can just do purely mental magic without having any props, without having to wave around sticks or swords or anything like that. And you just use those three things I mentioned earlier, to be relaxed, to be able to visualize what you want, and then to have the desire or the intent to make it happen.
And do they all use demons to give them power, or are there other things that give them power?
They don't know, for the most part, they're using demons. I mean, a lot of these cultural spiritists they think they're calling upon ancestors. They think they're calling, like in voodoo, they call upon the Loa, who are like, ancient gods that have Catholic masks on them. But yeah, ultimately, all of these different kinds of magic draw their power from demons or from fallen angels.
And how do you know that?
Well, again, because of the fact that in our experience, when we come against them now as Christians, if we pray and bind the evil spirits that are behind these various kinds of groups, their powers just fall apart, just like a house of cards.
Okay, that would work, thanks. So how long did you do white magic for?
Well, 16 years.
Okay, and how long did you do black magic for?
Well, actually, you see, you could do white and black magic at the same time.
Huh.
So I probably did black magic from about, let me think, probably 3 or 4 years.
What's the difference between white and black?
Well, white magic well, I'll just make it simple. White magic is basically doing stuff for good reasons. It'd be things like healing someone, doing a spell to help someone get a job. Stuff that would be very similar to what you might go into a prayer meeting in a church and ask for prayer for. It's usually not of a selfish nature, and it's with good intent. A white magician never knowingly wants to hurt anyone. Black magic, as you might guess, is just the opposite. It's when your intention are at best selfish or at worst evil. And you're deliberately, at the very least, you're trying to get what you want, no matter what happens to anybody else. And then it goes downhill from there, and you get to the point that ultimately black magicians like to do evil just for the pure sake of evil.
I see. Did you get any hints while you were doing magic that Christians have more power than white or black witches?
I actually had very little. In fact, I really never met a true Christian while I was a witch. So it was difficult for me to get that kind of a sense. The closest I think I would come would be the thing I mentioned earlier, where he tried to curse that woman who was the daughter of a Christian preacher, and all the curses bounced back. And at the time, we just didn't. I think the devil had so clouded my mind, I don't think I really got it. It didn't occur to me, well, gee, why is this measly woman able to turn aside all of these mighty curses, that we threw every curse that we knew, some of the raunchiest, vilest curses in the book, and they all just bounced off like, styrofoam balls off the armor-plated tank.
And normally would something have stuck?
Oh, yeah, normally, if we weren't doing it to a Christian, those things can kill people. I mean, some of those, like, for example, this fellow I mentioned earlier who was so evil and whose apartment I stayed in, he would do rituals on people that he didn't like, and they would have, within 24 hours, they'd have centipedes clawing their way out of the person's stomach. That's the kind of thing you can do in voodoo. Voodoo is incredibly powerful. But we used voodoo curses against this woman and no effect.
I see. From your own experience, what can you tell us about alternate universes and alternate realities?
Well, that's part of the some of the stuff that we were getting into with the Lovecraftian metaphysics, Transuguthian magic, and some of the stuff that this fellow was also teaching us. Part of it is called alternate, like Sirius star system magic, and that's not Sirius the star, not Sirius like being serious. And part of it is called archaeometry. And the idea is that a magician learns how to penetrate the membrane between universes. And then he goes or she goes into a new universe. Because, of course, even in physics today, they're telling us they believe there's millions of alternate universes out there. The quantum physicists talk about that. So what we do is we would penetrate the membrane between universes and go into a new universe that we would refer to as a virgin universe. And there'd be this enormous amount of magical power available because it's totally untapped. There's no life in this universe. And so you create life with the occult power you already have, okay? And then you become the god or goddess, the supreme deity of that universe. This is what we were taught. And then, if you really know what you're doing, you have the ability to take some of the power, because you think of this, think of how vast just this single universe is. How many galaxies, they'd say there's like billions of galaxies out there, each of one of which has billions of stars. Think of the energy that's in a universe. And you have the ability then, supposedly, as a magician, to pull this energy through the membrane back into this universe in which you live and use it for your own purposes. So that's basically one of the highest and most dangerous forms of magic.
Thank you. How did demons communicate to you?
Mostly through, hearing voices in your head. That was the most common way. Rarely if I was doing some kind of real big evocation or something, I'd actually, conjure one up. And it's not a pretty sight.
What do they look like?
Well, it's almost impossible to describe because they're not of a human shape. They're like more like insect-like, and they take form from the incense and stuff that you're burning because they can't normally manifest in a physical way. So they're very ugly and they're very small, but they're very, oddly enough, they're very formidable looking. But they look kind of like sort of an insect-like thing, except more like imagine like a giant, cockroach or something, except more like a praying mantis cockroach cross. You see, it's hard to describe the indescribable.
Right. I see. When you heard them or saw them, how did you know it wasn't your imagination?
Well, first of all, I didn't, except quite often they would tell me things that I would have no way of knowing in the natural realm. They'd give me access to information that was beyond my range of knowledge.
I see. So why do most people get into black magic?
Well, first of all, they don't start out that way. Usually they start out dabbling in the occult or witchcraft or white magic, and then it's a seductive thing. It's just like everybody thinks, oh, well, I can smoke dope, but I won't get into the weird hard drugs like, meth or heroin or cocaine. And it doesn't always work that way. Some people can continue to just muck around in white magic their whole lives and, fine, except of course they're lost and on their way to hell. But most people that start out with magic see the power of magic is the ultimate addiction. It's more addictive than heroin, it's more addictive than cocaine, it's more addictive than anything I've ever experienced in my life. And like any other addiction, you develop a tolerance to it. In other words, the body / mind / spirit gets bored with a certain level of power, and you want more power. And after a while, you begin to reason, as I did, that the only way to get more power, at least without, of course, going to Yahweh, is to go into black magic. Or you start out, of course, just doing gray magic, ethically challenged magic. And then you move further and further into black magic. And if you aren't stopped, as I was, by the power of the Holy Spirit, you can end up doing some very, very, very nasty things.
And what eventually happened to most of the black magicians you knew?
They went insane or they committed suicide. Their lives were ruined.
Wow. I've heard stories of people finding a magic circle with a lump of what looks like hamburger meat in the middle. Can you tell us what about they are?
A failed magical working. By that I mean a magician tried to conjure up some demon, and kind of like the story I told about the garage and the fellow with the magic circle in there who ended up basically getting vaporized. If you do one wrong move when you're doing one of these high-level ceremonial magical workings, you basically end up looking like roadkill.
How many times did you know of that actually happened?
Well, in my personal experience, only a couple of times, 2 or 3.
And friends of friends, how many other times would there be?
That was it. That includes friends of friends. So it's not like it happens a lot because, frankly, first of all, you got to realize there's not a lot of ceremonial magicians out there. I mean, the ratio is probably 100 witches to 1 ceremonial magician. And then there's thousands of witches, but so I mean and then of those ceremonial magicians, a lot of them never really get many results. I mean, I think I told you about how we did this really elaborate ritual of outwarding the mage and got our holy guardian angel to appear and all this stuff, and then we got these talismans and they didn't work. So a lot of times, sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't,
right.
We used to say. So when you factor all of that in, I mean, it probably a good ceremonial magician will only get like 2 or 3 really powerful magical workings, in a given few years.
Okay, thanks. What's the tree of life?
Well, the tree of life is an old thing that is, well, of course, it's even mentioned in the book of Genesis, but it's been used for thousands of years as a symbol of Jewish mysticism in what's called the Kabbalah. And magicians use the backside of the tree of life, which is called the qliphothic tree. And unfortunately, a lot of occult types have been kind of using both sides of the tree of life and kind of messing around with it and dabbling with it in a way that isn't what the original intention of the ancient Kabbalists was. But what we did is through this alternate universe business and everything, we would enter through dimensional gateways into the backside of the tree of life, the qliphothic tree, and there we would find these alternate universes. And also there was what was called the Typhonian tunnels, the tunnels of Typhon. And Typhon is the Egyptian destroyer god, okay? And we would use these tunnels to go from universe to universe to universe. And that way we would acquire more and more power.
Thank you. What's the Necronomicon? Or
Necronomicon.
Right.
Well,
say that again.
Necronomicon.
Okay.
Yes. Well, a lot of people think it's just a fictitious book that a kind of science fantasy horror writer named H.P. Lovecraft made up about 100 years ago. But actually there really is such a book. It's probably one of the most powerful and dangerous grimoires, that is to say magical workbooks out there. And it basically goes all the way back to ancient Sumer. And it has rituals by which supposedly you can call upon the great old ones and these ancient gods and, blah, blah, blah. And I'll give you an illustration of how dangerous it is. They must be now at least 25 years ago, they published a limited edition of just some of the mildest stuff out of the real Necronomicon in a limited edition book, limited to 666 copies. And oddly enough, it was dedicated, in the front cover it said, the dedication was ad Maiorum Crolium Gloriam, which is a parody of the Jesuit motto, to the greater glory of Crowley. And the fellow that I knew at the bookstore, this occult bookstore in Milwaukee, he said he sold one of these to a very skilled high-level magician in the community, and the guy took it home, and within 24 hours, his 3-year-old daughter had gone into the bathtub and cut her throat from ear to ear with a razor and killed herself. So he brought the book back.
Wow.
The second fellow, another fairly skilled magician, bought a copy of the book. He lived in a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. He went home with it. As soon as he walked in the door, he had this beautiful black cat, big, furry black cat. And the black cat went like this, and it started running around the room like it was demon-possessed, just like as fast as a cat could possibly go. And then, and this is really bizarre if you know how these apartments are concerned, all of a sudden it went like this and shot through the tempered glass window like a cannonball and dropped, 20 or 30 stories to its death.
Wow.
So he brought the book back. And then we bought it. And for whatever reason, we had it and we did some of the rituals and we had some very bizarre things happen, but nothing fatal, nothing, that threatening to us. And I believe it was because Yahweh was watching over us.
Right. And what advice would you give to people who have an interest in peeping into it?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's incomplete. The rituals are all partial because the real Necronomicon is locked up where nobody except very high-level Satanists and the Pope can get at it. There's a copy in the Vatican, I've been told, and there's a copy that I was allowed to copy from. But I was never allowed to have it in my possession. And I understand there's maybe a dozen copies extant in the world. And so for one thing, the book you're buying, which is available anywhere, you can buy it at Barnes & Noble, it isn't even the real thing. It's just like tiny snippets of it. And secondly, it involves a kind of magic that is so soul-destroying. And so, it's just like your soul withers even in the presence of that book. It's that evil.
Wow. So people shouldn't even open the book if they go past Barnes & Noble?
No.
Okay, thank you. What do you have to say about Harry Potter?
Well, I think that it's a series of books that's highly underrated in terms of the danger. They basically are a witchcraft 101. They teach kids to love sorcery. They teach kids situational ethics. Like, for example, the Pagan Federation over in England reported that when the first Harry Potter book took off over there, their phoned inquiries from young teenagers to how do I become a witch, went up 1,900% in 1 year. That's a pretty spectacular increase. We have a whole video about that. It's called To Harry or Not to Harry. And basically, we think that there are very cleverly packaged things that teach kids about the occult, and they teach, this is the important thing, they teach kids that magic is an effective method of solving problems. Because that's what Harry and his friends do. They use magic to solve problems. And we've tracked more than 150, and so far I think there's now, 6 or I forget how many books are out, but we've tracked more than 150 genuine occult practices. Yeah, some things in the books are made up, like the Quidditch game and everything, but there's more than 150 occult practices in those books that are really being done right now and here by magicians. So these things, if you want your kid to be a witch, let him read Harry Potter.
So could a child pick up demons from reading Harry Potter?
I think it's very likely, yes. I would never let my child near one.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. In your experience, are ghosts real?
Yes and no. I don't think there are disembodied phantoms of the formerly living waltzing around here on the earth plane. But I think there are what are called familiar spirits that are in the business of deceiving us human beings into thinking there are dead people walking around. And I think a lot of times demons are attracted to places that have had violence or blasphemy or other very serious sins done in them. If there's been a murder in a house, like the classic case of the Amityville horror, that kind of violence will definitely attract hordes of demon spirits because they feed off that malignant energy, that hatred. And so a person comes and lives in that house, and they're going to have all sorts of weird things happen that aren't ghosts. They're just demons trying to mess around and create evil and deceive people, because if people are deceived into believing in ghosts, then they're going to end up going to a spiritualist medium or someone, and they're going to be fed a line of totally unscriptural nonsense about the afterlife and about what the fate is of the living. They'll be told, oh, there's no hell. You know, there's just this great white light, and everybody just goes to the light. You know, like this, John Edward and some of these other people that are out there that are mediums. You know, then they're going to be deceived. That's why hauntings take place, is to deceive people. I mean, even in my case, partly I got into the occult because I started reading these books by Hans Holzer about how he would go in and visit haunted houses, and he'd use a medium to crack the case and get the ghosts out of the house.
Did you ever see a ghost?
Well, having said all of that, obviously I'd have to say no.
Okay.
But I have seen manifestations that were supposed to be ghosts. Yes.
I see.
In other words,
you saw something someone else would call a ghost.
We've done many, many haunted houses.
Mm-hmm.
We were Ghostbusters 10 years before the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
And upon occasion we would see like white diaphanous shapes or dark shapes moving through a room, like, you know, I can describe it as like they're on roller skates, you know, with no visible means of locomotion. But see, those things are demonic. They aren't real spirits. They're trying to deceive people.
See, thank you. Mm-hmm. What is a Mormon?
Well, a Mormon is a nickname for a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a very large, very successful cult, basically, to be blunt. I mean, the Mormons would wince to hear that, but the church was started in 1830 by a farm boy named Joseph Smith, who was basically a con man, who let his con get the better of him. And today they're headquartered in Salt Lake City. They have 10 or 11 million members worldwide. They're a very wealthy church. They're the wealthiest church per capita in the world. And basically they preach a gospel which appears to be Christian, but actually is not.
Why did you join that church?
Well, at the bottom of all of this weirdness that I was in, when I was even into vampirism and drinking blood and practicing black magic, a lady started praying for me because I'd sent a check to the Church of Satan. And I especially was knocked on my pins by that prayer. And everything in my life was shattered. I cried out, because you see, once Yahweh starts moving into your life, all bets are off. I mean, he could just throw the whole chess table over anytime he wants to. And sometimes you have to get your life shattered in order to really realize that you're at the bottom of the toilet, you know, circling the drain, you know. And anyway, so I cried out for a sign. And at first, Yahweh sent me these two Satanists to bring me some Christian comics that taught me how to get that would have taught me how to get born again, but I couldn't be bothered with reading them. So within a day or two, Mormon missionaries show up at our door. Now you see, this Grand Master Druid that I'd studied under several years earlier, about 6 years before, he had told us that if we ever got in deep spiritual trouble, that I should join the Mormon Church, because it was a church that had been founded by sorcerers, for sorcerers, for a place where you could hang out and appear to be a good, white-bread, Christian, all-American person, and you could still believe virtually all the stuff that witches believe. So that's why we joined the church.
Wow. And how high up did you go in that church?
Well, women don't really get to be high. They just get to be mothers. But I got to be an elders quorum president, which is like right underneath a bishop. My wife and I both got temple recommends. We got to go to the temple and receive our endowments, which is like the spiritual, gold seal of Mormonism. I mean, if you're like an elite number, maybe 10 or 15% of all Mormons ever get to go to the temple. So we were pretty high up. I actually was a paid teacher of theology for the church educational system. I was very zealous in my Mormon faith.
Right. And how many years were you in the Mormon church?
5 years.
What do Mormons believe?
Well, that's a big question, but to cut to the parts that make them not a Christian religion, first of all, they have God wrong. I mean, they believe that Heavenly Father is basically a superhuman extraterrestrial. He has a body and parts and passions, as they put it, and he lives on a planet called Kolob in the heart of the galaxy. They believe that his son, Jesus, is the spirit brother of Lucifer. He's not Almighty Yahweh made flesh. They also believe that we are not saved by grace alone, but we're saved by grace and then keeping the laws and ordinances of the gospel. They also have a lot of weird other beliefs, but those right there. And they also believe the Bible is not the inerrant word of God. They believe the only perfect book in the world is the Book of Mormon.
Thank you. Why do they baptize dead people?
Well, that's one of their beliefs, is that like the Mormon prophet Spencer W. Kimball says that the Mormon church has 3 duties: to preach the gospel, to perfect the saints, and to redeem the dead. And this baptizing the dead comes under that. They believe it's their mandate from the Almighty to go out and do genealogy and find out the names of every dead dude that ever lived, all the way back to Adam. And they've already got millions of names in their genealogical database in Salt Lake City. And they believe that they have to baptize all those people by proxy, because they say, well, what if someone lives in, like Tanganyika or somewhere, and they've never heard about Joseph Smith? They've never heard about the glorious restored gospel. How are they going to get to heaven? And they say, well, what happened is that this native African guy is going to die, and somewhere down they're going to go into spirit prison, which is sort of like a holding cell. And they'll wait there for a few thousand years until someone finally gets around to doing their genealogy and getting their name, and then they'll go to the temple and they'll be baptized in the name of, Magumbo of Tanganyika, and then they'll get an opportunity in spirit prison to accept or reject that baptism. If they accept it, then the prison doors are open and they get to go up to the celestial kingdom.
Wow. Do Mormons really believe that they'll become gods?
Well, one of the early prophets of the church said, as man is, God once was. As God is, man may become. And it is basically a doctrine of the church that we are gods in embryo, or goddesses in embryo. And every devout Mormon man believes he will be a god someday. And every devout Mormon woman believes that she will be a heavenly mother someday. That they will go off and spend all eternity procreating, and she will be eternally pregnant. And she will have billions and billions of spirit babies. And they will populate their own planetary system with these babies. Now, they don't usually lay this concept on people right away. When they're just investigating the church, they kind of wait in 6, 9, 10 months to kind of let them get acclimated to the church before they dump this on them, because it's kind of wacko. But that is what they believe. They believe anything less than godhood is damnation. Bruce R. McConkie, who was an apostle, the leading theologian of the last generation, taught that.
Wow. What do Mormons think of women?
Well, they obviously like them since they marry so many of them. But no, they don't practice polygamy officially anymore. But they basically believe women have their place. They think women cannot hold the priesthood, or they can't hold any ecclesiastical office in the church. Their most important duty is to be pregnant and have lots of babies.
Do Mormon women happy with that?
Well, some of them say they are. They have their own organization. It's called the Relief Society, which is sort of like a woman's auxiliary of the LDS Church. But there are a lot of Mormon feminists, one of them very shrill, I forget her name, about 10 years ago, who chained herself to the doors of the Mormon temple in Salt Lake and stuff like that. But most women say they're happy with that. Some don't, and Mormons get divorced just like every other religious group. But they're held over them. They cannot be saved without their husbands. He can choose to leave them in the ground on resurrection morning and not resurrect them, because a Mormon wife is not resurrected by Yeshua. She's resurrected by her husband.
So that's my next question. What are the spiritual consequences to a Mormon woman who's single or with a husband who's not a Mormon?
A Gentile. That's what they call non-Mormons. They call them Gentiles. In fact, the Mormon religion is the only religion where you can be Jewish and Gentile at the same time. Because if you're not a Jewish Mormon, you're a Gentile Jew. Anyhow, the consequences, if you're a single woman, you cannot achieve the highest degree of glory. You have to be married and you have to have children in order to achieve the highest degree of glory, which means you're going to be stuck in the terrestrial kingdom with all the slackers if you're a single woman or if you're married to a non-Mormon. So basically, a woman is shut out of the highest degree of glory unless she's been married in the temple. That's the goal of every Mormon who's really, sold out for their faith, is to be married and the word is to be sealed for time and all eternity in the temple.
What's a celestial marriage in the Mormon?
Well, that's what I'm just referring to. They believe that the Mormon prophet, originally, back in Joseph Smith day, was given the keys to unlock celestial marriage, among other things. And that what celestial marriage is, it's the idea that if you're, most people believe you're married till death do you part. That's what the standard wedding ceremony says. Well, Mormons teach that if you're married in the temple, after receiving your endowments, which are these long, elaborate initiation rituals, then if you're married in the temple by a patriarch holding the priesthood keys, given him by the prophet, then that marriage will last into eternity. And you can go on and continue that marriage and have all these spirit babies I just mentioned. So that's what they mean by celestial marriage. And without having that celestial marriage, without being married in the temple, basically you're damned in the Mormon church. And that's Bruce R. McConkie's own words.
Thank you. How are you able to go up so high in the Mormon church so quickly? Doesn't that normally take years?
No. The typical program, if you will, now mind you, we were very zealous and we worked hard and everything, but normally they tell you that from the time you're baptized, it should take about a year for you to become an elder. And once you're an elder, then you're eligible to apply for what they call a temple recommend. And that's like your key, if you will, to get into the temple. And you have to be interviewed, both you and your wife, if you're married, by both your bishop, who's like the local congregational leader, and then by your stake president, who's like kind of the equivalent of a bishop, say, in the Catholic Church. It's sort of confusing, but that's how it is. And you're asked all these pointed questions about your personal life, if you're, being faithful to your wife, if you, cuss and swear at the job site, if you, have dirty magazines hidden under your bed, if you, beat your wife. I mean, any number of things can disqualify you from getting a temple recommend. But then once you get the temple recommend, then you can go to the temple and you can get your patriarchal blessing.